It's just so wonderful to see all of you, especially the out-of-towners. Thank you, everyone who came from so far. So let's get some places. I think Jill may have come the furthest, Sweden, right?
Yay, Joe!
Yay, Jill!
Oh, there he is. He's not rude over there.
Minneapolis, Arizona, obviously Washington State, a variety of places, Texas. Where else? Where else have people? Virginia, of course. Great. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming. So I somehow got roped into the job of herding cats and doing something that would be like a program here today. So this is the dress rehearsal, and we'll repeat it tomorrow night for the actual show. So the idea is to provide a little bit of framework. So those of you who came in at various times, and you know, it's really funny to think about it, 50 years, but it's 6 years that our group actually existed. And so a lot happened in that time, and not all of you know each other or even know about what came first or what came later. And so this is our chance to share a little of that history. So I'm going to do it kind of chronologically, but I don't want to have like really long, drawn-out stories that go on and on for each little section. So instead, I will sort of announce the era, the period, and if you were involved in Koleda at that time, like especially if you joined at that time, please come forward just for a moment so we can quickly hear who was here representing that time period. And then any of you that have things that you want to share, it'll be your turn to have the mic. And then we'll probably try to remember a song from that era that we can all sing together. Sometimes we'll just decide we need to take a break and dance or talk a little bit more, and then we'll move on to the next era. Does that sound okay? All right, we'll give it a try and see how it goes. So the first era is what? No, that's okay. Yeah, some people, you might want to start lining up now. Just kidding. We got all the time in the world. We got a long afternoon here together. It's really cool. So I put some pink sheets just to give you a general idea of how I'm segmenting it. I know some of you have a lot of really special things to share, probably a little further on in the program. But right now we're going to start back at the beginning. So if you were there at the beginning in 1967, or up through our first big show in February of 1968 at the Hub Auditorium, please come up. So Sandy, we need you up. And David, and you're here representing all the teenagers. And Virginia, and Steve Erlinson, great. And Mary, you were part of this too, and Mary, and the Enslens, and David's coming, Cheryl's coming. So the very beginning, actually before there was a Koleda, there was a group of about 6 of us. Most of them were University of Washington students. I was a middle school student, and they somehow let me hang out with them. But we were going to do a show, a little Balkan, Bulgarian piece at the International Student Show on camp. It was actually not at the, I think it was actually at the, it was at the Opera House. It really was. Yeah, that was our first time performing in the Opera House, which was pretty cool. So, Steve, you were in there, right? And Sandy and I think we're the only 3 from that particular performance. Now, Cheryl was also there, but she was performing with the Arab group. And Lois Keel was also there, but she was performing with the Arab group. So this was kind of the beginnings of this. And what happened is that we were planning this little performance, 3 guys, 3 girls. And in the middle of our preparations, Dennis had moved to Seattle. Dennis Boxell, who you all know obviously, had moved to Seattle to work for Air Canada. And he was doing a workshop, and the team kind of found out that he had a lot of costumes that he was willing to lend us to wear, and then one thing led to another. He ended up teaching us his new choreography. So I'm going to ask Steve and Sandy just to share a little bit about kind of that transition from the excitement of doing our one show to the rest of our lives. Well, you know, Don Watland and Andre Corbett-Weber went down to Tacoma, and they came back, and it was not just costumes they brought back. They said Dennis had this recording of Boris Karloff playing accordion, and it was like all these transitions, and we were going to learn how to do that in about 2 or 3 weeks, I think, right? So I had a cast cast on. I had dislocated my knee, and so I had a cast on. I had to learn the choreography like that. But how did a normal person learn it?
We didn't really learn it. We just went on stage and played. Do you remember where we used to rehearse?
Closer to your mouth.
Oh, you're getting way
Closer
too
to your
old.
mouth.
Hi, you're getting way too old.
Introduce yourself
Oh,
first,
I'm Steve.
Erlinson,
Erlinson,
there's a lot of
sorry.
Steves.
Sorry. And where we used to rehearse was at Sandy's parents in Tacoma.
Oh.
Have you forgotten that one?
I had forgotten that one.
Yeah, we would travel down to Tacoma and would go into the basement, and that's where we would rehearse because we could never find any place in Seattle.
And Dennis lived just half a mile
Right,
from there.
and Dennis lived just half a mile from there, and so that's kind of where our rehearsals would happen. And then at the last moment, is that Dennis would say, "Oh no, that's not right. That that stinks," and he would throw something else, and it was just horrible rehearsals because nothing ever stayed the same. So by the time we got to the opera house, it was like, oh well, who knows what we're going to do? It was kind of unclear. So that was kind of the
I thought we did a pretty good job.
yeah.
Well,
I did.
So I think people liked it, and we decided that didn't want to be the last time. So then some people got this idea of kafana.
Oh, yeah, 50th and Roosevelt. Underneath the VFW, yeah. And sometimes we paid our rent in blood. Really, we would go to the blood bank, all of us would, and to the bus, and we'd go to the blood bank, and each of us would give a pint of blood, so that the VFW would get the credit, and we wouldn't have to pay the rent once in a while.
Wow.
It was illegal to live there, of course, but we did.
So shortly after that, that group of 6 quickly expanded because we grabbed Cheryl, of course, and we had other members like Virginia, and you came on pretty early too, Linda, right? Maybe by the fall. So Virginia Ram was a longtime friend of some of us who had been folk dancing for many years in Seattle, and was one of her major roles was running the second Saturday Balkan workshops, which was those were great dances every month that we looked forward to, and how we kept up our Balkan dancing skills in those days. So Virginia Ram, you want to say a word or two?
It's hard to remember all that. I had forgotten. There was something I was going to say, a remark that you made. What did you say a couple of minutes ago about? Oh yeah,
Things always changing.
Rehearsal place in. There was a place in Seattle in Fremont, wasn't there? I have a vague memory of that. Does anybody remember?
I remember practicing in Armor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was young.
Anyway, I can't remember what month Koleda started, but I was only there a few months, and then I left. I had planned anyway to go to Greece and live, so I did. So I never got to perform in shows with Koleda. That's too bad. I enjoyed that. I don't know.
Good to have you back. And Mary, I think you're right around that time too, right?
Yeah, I've been in the fall, I guess. I have been in the Bay Area.
Okay, so why don't you give her that? So one of the things that happened is that as soon as we got going, then it was like, okay, we have to get ready for a performance, and we also got school performances lined up, right? Wasn't that one of the big things? And so then we had all of these guys kind of joined right in the fall. So tell us more. So
I guess I don't have any really fascinating stories from that time. It was just great fun to dance with a bunch of people that were so enthusiastic about this stuff. And then it turned out to be a nice place to meet. And I ended up teaching belly dance classes there. So that worked out very nicely.
And you performed belly dance in the Greek Suite, right?
Right, yeah. So that was about it.
Okay. Pass it on to Terry.
Yes, with Bob Enslin.
Bob Enslin,
And I remember that one, I just loved that dance.
We all love that.
I went out wanted to teach those dances.
And I'm gonna invite my mom too. No, we're gonna do that next. Can you stay long enough for that? Oh, sure. Okay. We're just up to February. We're heading up to February of 1968, the first big performance. Yeah, that's what I mean. We're heading up to that. Okay. Well, I have kind of a, not necessarily. I'm Terry Steele. Now, put the microphone right by your mouth. Oh, okay. And I'm kind of like a hanger-oner and didn't do a lot of performing. I was like a sub. And but how I got connected was Lachlan McDonald.
Oh, yeah.
I was in art school at the time. He's now in Scotland, but he was the model in my art class. And I did a lot of work with him, and he also brought his guida and to the class. And he said Dennis was writing a book, and he needed an illustrator, and I should bring my work and show Dennis. And so that was the beginning of my affiliation with Koleda. More visual than dancing. So I think I'd like to call Linda back when we get to Europe and Hawaiian dances.
Well, I have something to say about the show.
The February show. Well, before we get there, Mary had arrived in September, so she was. Let's hear from Mary.
Okay.
We're still looking for lunch, sort of.
Okay.
At the end of summer in 1967, I was working for the Seattle Committee to End the War in Vietnam. Anybody part of that? I would walk from our headquarters, which is further south on Roosevelt, up to the library on 50th and Roosevelt. And every time I went to the library, I heard all this wonderful music coming out of this, place that looked like a construction zone. So I stuck my head in one day and said, I don't know what you're doing here, but I'm wondering if you need somebody to paint or nail boards or something. I'm good at it. So that's how I started. I probably would have if they'd asked.
So that's cool. And Cheryl, why don't you? The memory of a very important person who walked into Kafana. So Cheryl, why don't you?
Seems to me our first show was at Kola Festival in '67.
It might have, but that was just a small performance. It wasn't a 2-hour performance.
No, that's true. But about 2 weeks before that Kola Festival performance, Miracle walked into Kafana.
Red Oldsmobile.
442.
Watched us rehearsing. It was a man's rehearsal. He asked Dennis, "Don't you have any women in this group?" and Dennis said, "Oh, come back tomorrow night. We have the girls' rehearsal." So he did, and sat and watched us. And after a while, said, "See that second girl in line? I'm going to marry her." And he did. A couple of weeks later, we did go to Kola Festival to perform. He wanted me to ride down with him, and I said, "No way. Am I getting in a car with a strange sir?"
I'm going to take this out of sequence only because this happened all the way along, but I want you to know that Cheryl was the drug pusher of the group. Mostly Schlievitz.
How about you guys? You want to add something kind of leading up to the performance?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to one of the early performances, and I think several people here that were in. I'm Dave Harris. We were doing small shows like school performances, and one of them was at a television studio in Bellevue. And we arrived there in Croatian costume, getting ready to do the Croatian suite. And this is a tale of sometimes how things don't work out the way we have planned, and we go through these various periods of terror that people had already mentioned where everything changes. So we arrived there, ready to do the Croatian suite, and suddenly the sound engineer comes out and says, "We've lost the audio connection to the at the station. Do you have something else that we can do?" So very quickly he said, "Let's do Glomoj." You know, the quiet dance, right? Well, what you rely on when you're doing that particular, you know, you rely on the foot slaps to hear the rhythm, and also the women in their costume, when they were in Glomoj costumes, had strings of coins that would bounce, and that was how we determined the rhythm. So there we were in Croatian costume from the Branja area, and as we're going into the sound studio, you may be remembering it a little bit different, you know, foggy memories from 50 years ago. The sound studio was carpeted. So no footsteps, no sound, because, you know, the Croatian music was missing. We did Glomoj. We cut out the song, of course, there's no sound. And there we were, and the rhythm was thump, 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 thump. So we got out of there, and we called this entire event Glomoj and Branja on a Rug.
Yes, please.
I'm Elizabeth Henson. I'm Bob Henson's daughter. And I remember watching my father dance in Enchanted, and somehow he took me to the
Put it closer to the mic.
Talking to the mic, we can hurt everybody. Well, it was amazing for me as a painfully shy 7, 8-year-old, and it inspired a lifelong love of folk dancing that I've kind of kept up with, you know, doing Balkan, you know, here and there, and contra and other kinds of dances, but, you know, it's just been the muscle memory now. It's just, so I just wanted to thank you all for that gift, and I suspect there are other young people who are.
This is just a little aside. In 1972, I did a research project in Yugoslavia, in then Yugoslavia. And in Zagreb, there's a great festival, folk festival in August. And I attended one of the outdoor things, and who should be on stage but Lachlan McDonald and his group.
Yes, Linda's ready here.
I was living in Hansie Hall. I was a graduate student at the University of Washington.
What did Nancy do, right?
And Sandy was down the hall where she was on the first floor, and we got to know each other. Crazy folk dancer. And she told me, she was the one that got me into the folk dancing scene. Yay! And so I really got into it. And then I remember seeing Koleda dance, and I said, I will give my eye tooth to join this group. This was in the summer. Then I joined it in the fall. I was thrilled. And I remember right before the February show, well, this was a while back, Sandy had the idea to put on a 2-hour show, and I said, what? We're gonna put on a 2-hour show? How can we do that? She said, have faith. Have faith. We will do it. And you know that show was $2. Wow. And we have a poster and some programs of that show. And I remember sewing costumes in Lois Keel's apartment. I have slides of that, by the way. So later on, when you look at the slides, you'll see some of those.
Of course, is that isn't the one that Bill narrated?
No, that was the following year that he did it, yeah.
I think so, but I remember.
Pete Malchilovich was actually the MC for the first one.
Yes, right, yeah. And then I remember, I've got a photograph still of four kids on a stage at the University of Washington, and it was Mary and Sandy, I believe, and maybe you, Michelle, and then I think it was
That was earlier than Koleda.
Yes, early. It was earlier than Koleda. It was before the run up to that.
I wasn't there for that.
Yeah, it wasn't actually in
It was just maybe it was just.
It might have been before that.
Cheryl
I think it
was
was earlier, like Anna Cordes.
Well, this was the university where this feature was taken, and it had the two guys from Tacoma once.
Gig Harbor, yeah.
Harbor was it, so both those guys were there.
Don and Dave.
Don and Dave,
Yeah.
yeah. They were in that, and then and then got ready to do the trip, that was.
Okay, so now we're gonna head into the trip. So, yeah, well, before you guys sit down, no, we want to go eat. Oh, I know. But before you guys, okay. Well, we can do this a couple ways. We can just take a break and then start up with the trip, or we can kind of finish up with the 68 Europe trip, take a break then, and then continue on. What do you think?
Yeah. 68.
Take the 68 trip. Sorry, you get hold of. Okay, so if you went on the 68 trip, please stay up here or come. So Larry Ann, why don't you say a little bit about what was happening at the Sellers house all that spring while we were gearing up for.
Well, I got a phone call from Dennis and said, we need some costumes. Come up and go to Europe with us.
Yeah.
American costumes.
Yeah, American country.
So I came up and stayed at the Sellers house, and we made costumes, lots of costumes, and pioneer costumes, and Hawaiian costumes.
You know, I don't remember ever getting to bed before 3:30, 4 o'clock.
I think that was about it. That's why we're all so skinny.
Yeah.
And sleep.
So do you guys want to say a little bit about what led to the plans for the trip to Europe?
No, I wasn't here for that.
I could say a little.
Yeah, because Nancy, introduce yourself.
Nancy Shank, Caliensis. Okay, I happened to see the show, Hope Auditorium show, and heard singing La Darke, and saw Sandy and Michelle and Eve do the flirtation dance. I'll never forget that. And decided this was what my life was going to be all about.
Closer to your mouth.
Okay, is that good? Okay. And then later that spring, I had this little apartment. I didn't do much. I tried to connect to Kafana and everything. But David Harris and our friend Tina Johnson came to my apartment and said, Koleda's going to Europe and we're going to perform American music and dances, and will you learn to play the jug and come with us? So knowing nothing about that, I got some Jim Quest records and got a plastic jug and went around the university dorm stairwells. So this was to be our ethnic United States music that we did at the show. And then also we got together a little group doing tambourita music. Al Swenson loomed large there, as did Ron Konzak with his bass. And somebody handed me a brooch and little other people played other little tamburitas. So that all got put together. And then the amazing instrument, the Bulgarian kaval, I had to learn that. And I did that by taking the head joint from my flute and trying to blow into that open end, making big cut circles on my lips, but finally made a sound. So an orchestra got together at that point with the idea of accompanying dances for the European trip, and that's how I launched.
Up for that trip by telegram and mail, and I didn't know Dennis was doing it. And we got to Amsterdam to get on our bus, and it had been quoted as $100 to have this bus ride for months. Wow. No, for the whole summer. And when we got there, they told us about the misplaced decimal point, which is not the first time that happened in our career. When we went to LA, we also had a misplaced decimal point.
Yeah, it's amazing.
This was never in our favor. So I don't even know how we got along without money.
I think she wrote a lot of checks.
At that time I was married to a very, very charming man. And he had a salary. I think he may have been the only salary. And we had also saved some money. And so we ended up spending that money and money I borrowed from my sister and his whole paycheck one time, and it still wasn't enough. I mean, I have a vivid memory of going to the American Embassy and Sandy and I sat over 1 cup of coffee and dumped total sugar in it. So we would have a little bit of something to eat. So it wasn't great.
And then we hopped our passports.
Oh, right.
Oh my God, we did so many things. But one of the highlights, I think, for all of us is that we got to go visit Mirko's village, Vučkovica. So Cheryl, just tell us a little bit about what it was like. Well, we lost Omar. We were in Belgrade, and he ran across some other Muslim students, and we got on the bus, and we're halfway to Vučkovica before we realized that he wasn't on the bus. But he found us eventually.
When Koleda got to Rijeka, I deserted, got on the train, Zagreb, Belgrade, Kragujevac, then bus to Vučkovica. And I didn't know where I was going or what to expect. And Mirko was supposed to be there, only he wasn't. But Koleda, on their way back from Turkey and Bulgaria, stopped in Vučkovica and had a grand reception, I believe. Roasted pigs, lots of slivovica.
50 kilos of bread.
Yeah.
They killed the pig.
Ah, I didn't know that. She said Mirko's father taught her how to do ushest. And divvied people up around the village to sleep. Our Indian friends slept in the garage on the straw. And I don't know what else. We had a good time. And
I don't remember sleeping.
And people in Vučkovica still ask about people from Koleda. They're remembered.
Well, thank you everybody. More, we could spend all day just talking about that trip because just even the places we went to were pretty amazing, going from International Folklore Festival to festival and performing all over Western Europe, which was different than ever happened later in trips when the concentration was on the Balkans. So we were performing in Amsterdam, or in Holland actually, in Braunschweig. That was something that Sandy had arranged, Zurich. And then, of course, we ended up coming back to Dijon to the Festival de Vin. So it was amazing. Hello.
Yeah, the Opry Festival.
Yes. American Indians that went with us were going to come today. Has anybody come that I didn't see come in? Okay. So we were, one of the things that...
Yes, we made a lot of effort to get hold of some of the Indians, but unfortunately, a number of them have passed away. Bernie, of course, died quite some time ago. We just found out that George Abbott had died.
Oh no!
Yeah.
10 years ago.
I was in contact with Lily Kaufman, and she had hoped to come, but she's having a medical problem. She lives in Idaho, works with the Nez Perce tribal government.
Was she Nez Perce?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a couple of the other girls have passed away. I forget which ones now. And I tried to track down a couple of the others through their tribal headquarters because Lily told me which tribe they belonged to no avail.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're going to take a little break now. Some more people have arrived. Welcome everybody. So get more food, do some more talking. We could pick out a song or two from that era. Maybe you guys want to kind of lead the fray on that. And sing a couple songs if we want, get some music on, maybe from Tom's collection, and we'll just relax, and in maybe about 15-20 minutes we'll come back and look at the next era, which is post first trip to Europe, kind of what happened then. Song in order to get passage through, and of course the song we sang was one of our favorites, as I recall, and I think it's one that everyone here knows. I know a certain person, my younger sister, It's her favorite. So please join us at Što mi je milo. If for some reason you don't remember the words, there are some songbooks that David Harris has, so grab one. And I need some singers like Dottie and Jill and Mary to come up here and get it started. Trip heading into all of '69, which was sort of like about the Koleda bus. Well, I know there was other things. The Moore Show in February of '69. A lot of people came in from the university at that time. So if you were in that group, come on up.
What did she say?
Don't leave. You're always there. You just stay here. You don't have to talk. So anybody that joined kind of before the really before the build up to the 1970 trip. So kind of the 68 through 69, there was Colo Festival, we went to Reno, remember, Carl Joplin's mom. We drove our bus to Reno and then to Colo Festival. We wowed them with Rachenica and our choir Liberice, Prefraknaptichka. We had the big show at the Moore Theater. It happened about 3 weeks after I got back from Europe, actually. That was the time we debuted La Darke, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. There's more, I think. Anybody else in that? Yes, Mary St. Germain. So let's just quickly introduce yourselves, and let's just go quickly with introductions, and then we'll share some memories if we have them to specific. Selena, you want to start? Just introduce yourself. That's it. Introduce yourself and pass the mic.
Okay, I'm Elselina Callis.
Yeah, good. Dottie Boyle.
Mary Humbly again. I probably won't stay up here like you've been here for
We weren't here for the whole time.
Rebecca Colias, you knew me as Becca.
Jill Johnson, you knew me as Becca.
Rachel Colias Johnson.
I'm here, how are you?
Oh, oh.
Mary St. Germain.
Hi, Jose Amiel Perez.
So, to me, of course, I had stayed on in Europe while the rest of the group came back, and then you kind of produced a whole new show, and we were performing it at the Moore Theater in February. And my wonderful stepfather, Bill Sellers, agreed to be our stage manager. It was the first time we actually had somebody. And do you remember, I think we were changing like way downstairs and had to take like a lot of stairs to get upstairs. And throughout the show, we were always a little late. And yeah, people had to fill in with different things. So that was an amazing show, certainly for me, and it was the beginning of La Darke. And I wanted, Mary, does somebody want to just share what it felt like to try La Darke as a piece? It was a
Yes, because I wanted to say one thing about singing, and that is that now I've been singing for almost 50 years, and the way I learned how to do Balkan singing was through La Darke, and it was thanks to Nancy Schenk, Kalionsis, and who was our singing leader after she came back from Bulgaria in fall of 1968. And we sat there and sang what are the first four? Minosimo. We sang it over and over and over, and that's how I learned to get the sound as well as I could. And so thank you, Nancy.
Yeah. So Rachel, say something about how you got involved with music and everything with us.
Yes, my sister, Julian.
Folks.
I just wanted to mention that at the Moore show, it was one of those times when you're in everything, and I was in everything except that I had a temperature of 103.8, and the only way I made it through was that Cheryl changed me each time. You know, took off my clothes, put on my clothes, and then I ended up in the hospital at the end of it. Seriously.
Very, very healthy thing, Koleda.
Well, I got well.
Yeah. So at the at the end of the summertime was after the summer, Larry Ann and I traveled back to Yugoslavia and Italy. My parents had moved to Italy that year, and Cheryl and Mirko were over in Vučkovica. We visited there as well. And then Larry Ann moved back to Seattle, and then she became a full-time person, and more than full-time, time and a half person in Koleda, right? Yeah. I think most people were time and a half people. And what else about the 69 time period and kind of leading up? There was a lot of parties. Oh, there's a very important person you want to mention.
Okay. How I came into Koleda was in the fall of '68. I just started college, and they had activities on parade in the hub. And Koleda had just come back from Europe, and they had set up a booth there, and there were
It was beautiful with all these costume pieces, and they had music, and they were all so happy. And I think Linda Kwan was in the booth, and maybe Sandy. I can't remember, but they were very enthusiastic and warm, and they had a training class. So I started in the dance training class. That was.
So, yeah, another thing that happened in '69 is that Professor Jim Ojro was just returning from 2 years in Romania and a year in Bulgaria, and he walked into Kafana and felt like he was back in the Balkans. And so he enticed a lot of us to take, like I took Bulgarian, then it was my first year of college, and to do other classes. You know, a number of people went back and took classes at the university, kind of connected with the Slavic department. And it was really the beginning of that strong relationship with the Slavic department. And I want you to know that Jim is going in for surgery this week on cancer of his throat and his vocal cords, I guess, actually in his lung. And he was hoping to be here today. He may still stop by briefly, but please, let's just have a big round of cheer for Jim Ojro. I'll find out, and we'll pass it on if you'd like visitors. Pass that on. So I think this is probably the best time of any to do Ladarke if we're going to do it, right? I mean, okay, so who's going to do it?
Well, I'm good.
Maybe a year or so ago, I had been singing in another women's choir, and they were going to be having a concert, a reunion concert, 10-year, I think, and they wanted to sing Ladarke. And so we were rehearsing at school somewhere, and we were rehearsing with the orchestra, Alan. And so somebody said, oh, you know, I think this was performed like back in, something like way back in 1984. And I said, no, I was sitting there and I said, actually, the very first time it was performed was in February of '69. I said, when Koleda did it. And all these other women in the group looked at me and said, well, we weren't even born then. Do I feel like a grandmother or what?
One that let us off in, I don't know if you feel up to it or joining maybe Jill would lead us off. Minosimo? Okay, and then Linda Kwan, wherever you are, I know you did the third movement and I did the second, but anybody's welcome to join in. We don't need solos today. But we probably need to start, okay. We need a starting note, but she's got it.
Michelle!
Oh, let's just do it. Several people put a lot of money forward to pay for everything today, so if any of you can contribute a little bit, there is a box there. You can just put it at $5, $10 if you can. That'd be great, just to cut some of the costs for other people. There's also, where did our photographer go? Because he's got a bunch of pictures, and if he has one that you are in, you can take it. So I think his laptop is right there. Oh, he's right there, okay. Yeah, he's got his book back there, so feel free to take one. All right, are you ready to move on to the 1970 trip?
Okay.
Okay. All right, so if you went on the 1970 Koleda trip, please come up and we'll just hear a few highlights.
No, we're
The
not.
1970 trip to rival basically in Serbia. I think we all arrived in Belgrade, didn't we, or something, or Croatia? And then down to Macedonia, we went to Petsa's camp, and then we went to Bulgaria. You guys did a lot of show dancing and things like that. So we had a really notable addition to Koleda that just enhanced all of the earlier work that had happened around American music, and that was the addition of Hank Bradley.
I have to say, I was once an honest Californian, but I was minding my own business, working for a living in Oakland. My phone rang one night. This is about November of '69. It's some unknown lady on the phone. We have this group up here. We like to do Yugoslav and Bulgarian dances. And we're going to go to Yugoslavia and Bulgaria this summer. And we heard you played the fiddle. Would you like to go? That ended my career as an honest Californian.
We thank you, Sandy.
Yes, yes. So the things that Nancy Shanka described earlier on the earlier trip, which was a group of individuals who brought all of their talents together and produced some amazing things. Things were really getting tight and cohesive with music, which you'll hear in the next period of time as well. You know, we're really getting a lot of more experienced talented musicians and up-and-coming talented musicians. We got even more after that trip, really. Any other highlights from that trip that anybody wants to? Yes. I think you have to stand in the middle. Yeah, you know, that's one of the things is that, you know, all of us got involved in Koleda because we wanted to do like Bulgarian and Yugoslav dances and things like that. And then we were going to Europe and, okay, Appalachian, that's kind of fun, that's great. Then pretty soon you're doing square dancing and Hawaiian hula. That was cool.
Well, we did the hula in the 68 tour too. And I remember going back to 68, dancing in a stadium in Turkey in our Hawaiian costumes, and the guys were jumping on the stage. This is what I heard. I was concentrating on the dancing. But anyway,
I was just going to mention, I had by myself on stage, Hawaiian costume, downstage. And there were lots.
Yeah, she was playing music.
I was doing the board and singing.
Anyway,
that was the second.
the 1970 trip was different from the 1968 trip because there were only 25 people as versus 50. And it was much more cohesive. And you know, I went back, I have slides there, which you might want to see, of all of the trips, and from 67 all the way. But the thing that really remarked me about this 1970 trip, we had fabulous time. We were in Neresnica, in a Vlach area. We went down to Prilep with a Macedonian dance troupe. Let's see, we went to the Zagreb Festival, and Carl Joplin was with us. He was a fabulous photographer. And I made some copies of his slides, yeah, costume slides.
Where are they in that room? Tell people that they're there.
And yeah, later on, I will have to run the machine, and we'll do it from the very beginning to the end, and whenever. But it was a much more cohesive trip, and coherent trip. Yeah. Was this the trip we went to Oteshevo?
Yes.
We were on Lake Oteshevo and also in Okri. And we were with Petsa Atanasovsky. We learned the bride's dance. And that was really quite a special time.
And Sandy, do you remember that they invited us to perform it at the Okrit Festival with Petsa's group from Prilep? You and I danced it. Yeah, that was really exciting. I think the Bulgarian time was also amazing, and I think Ojro was with you during the Bulgarian time mostly, right? Yeah. And do you guys have any other comments? But what came back is that a lot came back, and that really speaks to what happened afterwards.
It was a Wild West tour. First in Vinkovci, and then I remember Jim Ojro in Bulgaria. We're sitting out in a rainstorm drinking Slivovica, of course. And both in Vinkovci and in Bulgaria, the local cop pulled out his pistol and fired up in the air just to celebrate the occasion. It was the Wild West.
Wild East.
I can't remember which village it was in, but it was the one street village, and they were gonna put us up so we could hang out there for a while. How do you set up deals like that? Venice was amazing sometimes. And so there was, it might have been, but they put, the only way that they could make room for everybody was for the man and woman of the house to go sleep someplace else. Where? And they would put two couples, or something like couples, in one double bed. So we all got to know each other a lot better.
And I see that Pratt's didn't come forward, but I'm sharing with them that one of my favorite memories was in Luzhany when we were sitting by the river, and you guys were talking about your marriage, you know, and a lot of us were pretty young and not married yet or anything, and to see you guys back here, you know, it's almost 50 years later. It's amazing. Yeah. Okay, lots more to come. Any other specific memories about the summer trip? That was a great trip. And it was better organized for sure. We had a lot of help with Petsa's help with, yeah.
That is, it's East Serbia, right on the Romanian border. I got into a family who was taken care of by them, and one evening it was decided that this foreigner who played the fiddle and Gospodin and the family were going to drink Sudovitz with each other, drink for drink. And away we went, but I upheld the honor of the United States. We both slid under the table simultaneously with about 7 glasses.
And that's a story that could probably be retold a few times in this room. So thank you guys, everybody, from the 1970 trip. One show or one thing at the Moore Theater. And Mary Sherhard was one of the people in the audience. Maybe she'll tell you more about the audience too, but anyway, and Nona came in around that time too. And one of the things that we brought back from that trip was that beautiful collection of costumes, Mariovo costumes. And so my memory of that time is seeing all these young girls that had recently joined. They just look magnificent in these costumes. But tell us about your arrival into Koleda.
Thanks, Michelle. Let's have a hand for Michelle. She's doing a great job. So I was a Buddha
Buddhist. I was one of the Nichiren Shoshu Buddhists that chanted Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. I was 15, going to Lincoln High School, and Keith McConaughey was in my chapter of Buddhism, and he invited me to come see his group, the Koleda Ensemble at the Moore Theater. And Nancy was in that group, and David Harris was on. Anybody else in that group? And Sandy was in that Nichiren Shoshu Buddhist. So I was chanting, and I was chanting for a puppy, but anyway, but I have to back up just a hair, just to give you a little bit of background. Before that, so that was in February, I saw that group.
No, it must have been sooner than that.
No, it was February. It was February 1970. Am I mistaken?
I think so, because the trip was in 70, and I thought we did the Moore show right after we got back, like maybe October or September. I think
Anyway.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Anyway.
Okay, well, I'm basing that on a piece of paper in my, anyway. So anyway, just to back up a little bit, to give you a little bit of background. So I thought it was February, but anyway, in November, before I saw Koleda, my father had had a heart attack and died, and 30 days before that, my brother had committed suicide. And within just the previous year, my parents had split up and we moved from Alaska, and I was just lost. So I joined Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism, and I was chanting for a puppy. And I didn't get the puppy, but I did get Koleda, and it saved my life. Well, you should be applauding for yourselves, because Koleda knocked my socks off. I could probably find the seat that I was sitting in at the Moore Theater. And I started going to those rehearsals, and I joined the group, and it gave me love, it gave me identity, it gave me purpose. So I used to think I was just really lucky, and now I think it's divine intervention, because my mother was about to give me to foster care. She was this close, and Cheryl and Mirko took me in. I know. So I just want you to know that every time I taught singing or I performed singing, it was out of the responsibility I felt for what this community gave me, which is my life. So I really, God bless you all. And oh, I have to show off. I have to show one thing. Here, Michelle, take this. And this is what I got. Here, can you take the mic? This is what I got in November to thank you all and to remember each one of you every day I am alive.
It's a tattoo of the Koleda man. So, time period after that you start, or if you just even performed in that time period, the 70 to 71 time frame, when the Koleda Bito group and the album happened. We're going to talk about the Koleda album, because that was a big deal. We had the choir, and we had the album that got created. So if you're in that time period, come forward. Ricky. Where's Jill?
Hi guys.
And Dottie. I just remember Dottie. That's when she was part of the choir and everything. She had danced earlier, but the choir just stepped it up to a whole new notch at that point. And the dancing and was great, but the music. So does somebody, what about Rachel? There you are. Tell us about that crazy Bito band.
Well, I guess we were.
Well, yeah. Talking about Marcus, Bosco, Alexander, and myself. We got together, I guess. Alex and I started playing before the in 70. Marcus joined us after. But we were all within 6 months of age.
About 15, 16?
We were, 15. Because I turned 15 in Europe in 70. Yeah. And we actually went to high school there for a little while together. We had quite the time playing music together. And it was a wild time, it really was. I remember when we made the recordings, we were in the recording studios late at night. Going on and on. Oh yeah.
Drinking wine.
Drinking, oh yes. And whatever else was being passed on.
Do you guys want to say anything about the Koleda choir and kind of how you guys were doing that?
I don't know that.
So I'd always sung in high school, well, from grade school I had always sung, and when I joined Koleda, they had this really sexy project going on in an actual recording studio with a choir, and so they immediately, I couldn't hardly walk. I had 2 left feet, so I couldn't dance, but I could sing, so they immediately threw me in the choir. And it was so exciting. They were adults, and they were all drinking, and they were singing, and it was just so fantastic. And they were teaching. There were a lot of good teachers among them, like Jill and what have you, teaching us Otvorenglas, the sound, the correct sound. I finally broke through at Mr. D's restaurant in the bathroom. And then when I was living with Don or with Rick and all those guys in the Minnesota house, we drove them crazy, Dennis and I. He would go, eh, and I'd go, oh, and he'd go, eh, oh, until about 4 in the morning. But anyway, so the recording was really, I thought, great, and it stands the test of time. It's a great recording.
So we're going to take about a 15-minute break now, and then it's going to be we're going to head into this last period of time. But one of the reasons I think that we got the Minnesota connection so strongly in the last period of time in Koleda is because Dennis was from Minnesota. So I would like to just take a few minutes for anybody who wants to share anything about Dennis Boxell, because clearly the experiences that we all had over those years would never have happened in the way they did without someone that had the genius that Dennis Boxell had. Right. I think all of us know too well Dennis's foibles, and they've heard him at various times in his life. He bounced back many times and contributed in many different locations. But I think it's always good to remember the things that had a positive impact on our lives, and Dennis Boxell certainly for me did. He opened, from the time I first met him, actually when I was 12, when I decided that I was going to go to Macedonia when I was 16, and I ended up doing that, he had a big influence on my life. So I would just invite anybody, we're going to come up with the last group in a few minutes, but let's take an interlude around Dennis Boxell. I know there's lots of funny stories, like Larry Ann driving to Montreal and getting stuck in snowstorms and, trailers worth of costumes hanging over precipices and whatnot. But so a funny story is fine, or something meaningful, or anything that you learned from the time of being with Dennis. I have to say that the thing that I really learned was to believe in people, just put out possibility, because he always did that, and somehow we rose to things that we never thought we could ever do. And I've tried to carry that over in a lot of the work I do with teachers as well. But I know that Peter Lippman...
Just backing up a little bit, people consider that Koleda started so many things over the whole next 50 years, and for me it actually went before that, because my mother met Alice Nugent, started folk dancing, and they started a dance group, and so that started it for me. And but that was folk dancing. In a way it was just folk dancing, and then Dennis came along and Koleda came along, and added something which, as I remember, was interest that went deeper and further. And there was the language. You became aware that there were rich languages which Dennis knew a lot of and shared that with us. And there was live music, not just recorded music. And my experience with Koleda through Dennis was that he worked, and I guess then we worked to bring in people from the communities, the immigrant communities, and that was a really enriching thing. Yeah. And what kind of cigarettes did Dennis smoke? Of course. Always. And what about his car? Do you remember his car?
Mustang! I got my driver's license on that car.
That's not the one I remember. I remember the dark blue Buick, about a 56 or something.
I remember when it broke down at our house.
And there was, of course, charisma. There was something that held us all together. We all, I think, looked up to him. Yeah. And although at some point, this is not about Dennis, but at some point I learned, You want to be careful trusting a charismatic man. All right, that's all about Dennis for now.
Very eloquently said.
So I'm Don LaCourse, and I'm one of the Minnesota Connection.
Yay!
And I had the privilege of getting to meet Dennis right after he got out of the Army, and he came home to Minnesota. And that was, I think it was 1960. No. I met him in like 1960. I was like 7.
Wow.
61? Yeah. I remember his 21st birthday.
Wow.
He and my father drank an entire bottle of sugar.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So he started coming to the Twin Cities International Folk Dance thing regularly. And my parents had taken me to see the Tamburitzans, and I wanted to grow up to do that. And then Dennis started this kids group in South St. Paul, Minnesota, where we alternated. One week we were at the Serbian church, the next week we were at the Croatian hall. We had Serbs and Croatians in the same group.
Wow.
It was wonderful. And so that was my introduction. I was 7, and I was just thunderstruck by this man who was, yeah, I was one of those, kids. So then he moved away, but he would always come back. And I got to meet Atanas in his first tour. You know, they stayed at my parents' house. I got to dance with Atanas when I was 10 or something like that. It was, pretty amazing things that got, to happen to a kid. So that was always in the back of my mind, and Dennis shows up in fall of 1971 with this brochure and this LP, and he says, "You have to come to Seattle." Oh no, I'm doing musical theater and blah, 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 blah. No, you have to come to Seattle. Well, Barbie Obreski left, and my life partner Jonathan Fry came, and Stephanie Hegland came, and I was the holdout. Because I was busy doing theater, I was really liking my life, But John and I wrote constantly, and he was saying, and now we're getting ready for this big show at the Playhouse, and we're doing Faust, with the opera. And it's like, okay, I'm coming. So I finally got here, and we'll talk more about the rest of it, but we talked about Dennis he was my hero for a long, long time.
Yay. And actually, because you go back to those years, I'd like to invite Virginia Ram to come up now, because Virginia is one of the people responsible for Dennis being able to collect all the music and dances, meet Atanas, bring him to the country, this country, because she was traveling in Europe, and they had a car actually that had been bought by Bruce Gibbs, and she was allowed to drive it around, and so she ended up driving Dennis all over Bulgaria and Yugoslavia. So a lot of people, you probably have never heard these stories.
Oh, no jokes. Anyway, yes, it was wonderful to have that car. And I didn't even know that Dennis was in Europe. I had just assumed that he was still in the States. So I was merrily going around Europe, and I had finished going through Greece and the Balkans and back through Switzerland and Austria and Switzerland, and then I went down to Spain, and then back. I had registered to study French at the Alliance Française in Paris, beginning in March. So I drove up, and I was in the middle of my French studies, and I get a letter at the American Express, which is where tourists used to get their letters before the internet and everything. And it was from Dennis, and he was in Macedonia with Atanas and Luka. And he said, "Oh, I heard you had a car. I want you to drive and help me go through Macedonia and Bulgaria, because I want to collect costumes and musical instruments and other folklore." So I said, I thought about it a while, and I thought, well, this is an opportunity too good to miss.
Yeah.
So I got in the car and drove across France and Germany and Switzerland and Austria and Yugoslavia and down to Skopje. And I don't know if you remember a huge earthquake in 1963 that devastated Skopje.
Yeah.
Well, Atanas and Yubka had to live in a tent all winter.
Oh my gosh.
And they had just moved into their prefab new home. So Dennis and I got to stay there. Well, Dennis was already there. So after a while with them, we headed for Bulgaria. And it was easy to get in, and the people are so friendly and wonderful. And it was the communist era, so there weren't too many fresh fruits. Once in Sofia, we were on the side of the huge town square, and I saw something orange and glowing across the square, which was huge. It was farther than from here to that wall. And I couldn't see what it was, but I went over, and it was a lot of oranges piled up from Israel. So I bought a few because I was starving for fruit.
Wow.
At that time. Do you know a drink from Bulgaria called buza? Does anybody know that? It's slightly fermented, but it's very refreshing. I'm not quite sure what it's made of, but I drank a lot of it. Anyway, so we headed out east in Bulgaria, and we stopped in towns and villages, and Dennis would go to the museums or to the authorities or to just groups, and he was able to collect some costumes and musical instruments. And we were there collecting for 3 weeks. This was in the month of April. My plan was I had to use my airline ticket within the year, which would end in the middle of June. And I had planned to finish my French studies and then go to England and look around England. But I did this trip instead, and I'm glad I did. Okay, so we had the car full of Bulgarian costumes and Bulgarian musical instruments. And Dennis thought he could just waltz right out of the country with them. But we got to the border. This was the May Day parade. It was May 1st was coming, and he wanted to be out of the country before, because they celebrate May 1st. It's one of their big holidays. But at the border, the guards asked for permission slips for all these instruments and costumes. And of course, Dennis didn't have any written things. So back to Sofia we went. And I'm sort of glad for myself because I got to see the May Day parade in Sofia, and it was spectacular. You've seen the things on television about the Moscow parades. Well, this was just as good. It had all kinds of fire, down the main street, and soldiers marching goose steps, and it was quite interesting. Well, anyway, so when everything opened again after the May Day celebrations were over, Dennis had to go to some government authority, and he had to go to the National Museum and get permission from several different people. And I remember that they unpacked everything and had it out all over the floor, looking at it, taking it apart piece by piece to see just what he had. Finally, though, to make a really long story short, they gave us the permission, or they gave him the permission. I was just the driver. And so we got out and went back and saw Atanas and Yubka again. And then he was going to stay there or go somewhere else, and so I drove back to Western Europe and went on from there. But I thought you'd enjoy that about
my truth was Dennis.
Yes.
Zagora and Plevin costumes that he got at that time. Yeah, so many of you love those costumes. Yeah, I think there were some from Yumble too, right? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Anybody else want to share any memories or thoughts about Dennis before we go to the last group?
Yes. A little bit naughty.
Yay!
We had a show in Portland, and we dropped the troop off at wherever to start getting ready for the show. And Dennis says, "Oh, we don't have any red roses." So he made me drive to the cemetery. They have lots of red roses.
Last chance. Anybody? Well, of course you can always share more later. So at this time, let's have anybody that danced in that period after the Koleda album. So that's sort of in the summer of '71. I remember Dennis taught a class at the University of Washington. It was in that Armory building, and a lot of people like Alex, I think, came out of that period of time, and Mary Jane who was there last night. So if you're from that '71 through the end, come up. If you were dancing during that period of time, singing or making music.
I went outside, missed the last of the Dennis.
Oh, shoot. But you know Virginia's story, at least.
Yes. Dennis is responsible for my life for the last 50 years.
Yeah. Okay, so Don kind of introduced us, even though he was the last one to come, about the Minnesota connection. That's part of what I remember. I had some time off during those middle years of Koleda. I was going to college at the University of Washington. I was traveling and studying in Russia and whatnot. Some of the time I was with Dragi Spasovsky, who was someone we met in Macedonia on our first trip. And so I wasn't involved like in the album. I missed that period of time myself. But this time I really came back, and we had again a wonderful choir. Come on up, Mary, too, and all of these fresh folks that had joined in recent years. And it was just, we had so much fun. One of the things I remember is that because I was one of the tall girls, I often got to dance with Mark Morris, who was about 14, I think, at the time, right? And we did Vrlichko together, we did Hungarian together, and you know, when I think of the rest of my life of, I got to dance with Mark Morris, I mean, that's pretty special. Anyway, so what would you like to say about this time? How about I turn it over to you guys?
Well, I first met Dennis in the old Armory, because I was a ballet student. And Dennis, and every summer they had like some kind of a folk dancing thing, or, you know, and that summer they had Balkan dance with Dennis. And I was like fascinated by, it was the first time I had ever like had some kind of folk dancing that really hit me. It was like the most amazing dancing and the most amazing music. And so I wanted to continue to be involved with that. And so, you know, he invited me to join Koleda, you know, and so I started dancing with the group and learning all these amazing dances. And he was just like such an incredible teacher. You know, he was just, and we learned so much from him. And, you know, being able to perform in those amazing costumes, and we had so much fun together as well as dancing. A lot of fun, a lot of wild parties, especially with Mark.
Introduce yourselves too. Alex, introduce yourself too.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Mary Jane, and started dancing at the same time. Actually, I went to audition with Ruth Anna Boris to take ballet classes. And she went and did my little thing, and I was terrible, of course, and she said, dance class, and I'm going, Yugoslavia, is that like a country? So I showed up every day with Alex, although I was watching this beautiful exotic woman who wrapped her legs around her head, and I'm like, couldn't even walk across the room. And, but every day for a month I went to this class, and all I heard was a sound coming out of the tape recorder that sounded like a radio between stations. And finally, after listening to this noise every day for about a month, one day I walked in and Dennis turned the tape recorder on and I heard music. Well, later on that summer, Mary and Alex Epler came to give us live music for the first time, and of course it was like starting all over again, actually hearing live music. So at the end of that summer, Dennis was auditioning to start Koleda up and going again, and Linda Stouffer and I had become fast friends during this time, and we had decided, well, we weren't going to audition, but halfway through the audition, we said, well, let's just go down to the Armory and see what's going on. And so we walked in the door, and Dennis looked at him and said, oh, thank God you're here. We have a performance tonight. Hence my introduction.
How about Penny?
Yeah, Penny.
Come on, how did you get involved, Penny?
Penny, are you going to read Mark's thing?
Oh yeah, read Mark's thing.
Yes.
I was going to the NOVA Project. It was an alternative high school. It was at the YWCA. And there was an audition that all my friends told me about with Mary Hoagland was one of the choreographers and Mark Morris was the other one. He was 15. And then right from there, we did a program, and then I got into the Koleda training program. It was amazing. I was kind of doing everything Mark did and then a few other things too. Anyway, I was in New York in June and saw Mark for a whole afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I danced with his company for 12 years and more and longer. And he sent a note and some wine. So people had wanted me to read the note. I sent it out on email. He said to say send all, reply all, and I don't know why, but anyway. Dear Koleda, I don't go a day without thinking of some aspect of Koleda culture. I am a choreographer whose every dance contains the germs of the dance music experience that all of you gave to me and to one another. The first inklings of a life I have now. The first of so many life-changing ideas and experiences. Independence, dancing and singing at the same time, holding hands or belts, queer power, pot smoking, communality, adult friends, social fluency, rhythm, sex for fun, shlivovica, cooking for a mob, sightseeing, excellence, pride of accomplishment, enduring friendships, a never-ending interest in music and dances and languages and cultures of the terrifying, friendly, funny, tender, incomprehensible world. Every kind of dance is a variety of folk dance, and my work is no exception. The kindness and inclusiveness of the greater Koleda family have been among the most moving and influential elements of my life. In wishing that I could be there with you now, I guess I am. Hail Koleda. Hail Terpsichore. With my love and gratitude, Mark Morris.
Hi, I'm Barbara Obreski. Everyone knows me as Barky, and I was just reminiscing. Stephanie Hageland, I, and Barbara Shem all came out on the train from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we formed the Minnesota House on Gwen. Yeah. And at that time, I think Mary Shearhart came to live with us. Yeah. Dennis was in the basement. You know, he never paid rent. He was very and I'm always amazed. He got us to rehearse 3 times a week. He got us to run the parties. Got us to make food for the banquet. He got us to go to Manresa Castle to perform, serve dinner, and we never got paid. But we all loved it. We all had fun. Remember the dormitory? You and Mark Morris under the blanket. Very suggestive, but it was the funniest routine. Remember the, and then we went to Anacortes and sold chabapchichi at the stand.
That was Velaluca.
That was Velaluca. I couldn't remember, but I remember Dennis coming up.
And there was Victoria.
And oh yes, Victoria performance, and driving the hotel staff crazy, running up and down the hallways.
Dancing in the hallways. I remember Michelle and Dimitri dancing.
There's so many things to say. My name is Rick Horn. There's so many things to say. I don't know where to start or where to stop. Penny was my first partner in my very first show, and I was her first partner. Hungarian dance at the Playhouse in 1972. But I wanted to say, everyone sitting up here stands on your shoulders.
Yes.
because you were in Koleda and then you left Koleda and you probably didn't know a lot of people that came after you, but we always heard stories about all of you.
The trips.
And you
We were the newbies.
You set the bar for this last generation. So thank you to everybody here. And, I know we all love Dennis in different ways. We love Dennis, but and he was an incredible influence. But it was Mary Hoagland that trained this generation.
Trained me.
And Dennis trained Mary.
Yes. Carol and Mary Ann and Jared.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say is not from this era. It was many years later. It's just a funny story. I was working at a bank in 1997 in downtown Seattle. I had a client come in, sitting at my desk, and we were just talking about things that we did as hobbies. And I said to her, "Oh, I do some folk dancing." And she said, "Oh, really?" She said, "Well, if you like to folk dance, you need to go see the Koleda Folk Ensemble." And she said, "I haven't seen them in years, but if you can find where they're performing, go see them." And I said, "Koleda?" I said, "How do you spell that?"
That's a good one.
I'm hobbling because of my knee. From dancing too much last night.
Introduce yourself.
I will. I'll get there. Don't worry. I can handle a microphone. Hi, I'm Jimmy. I'm not absolutely certain of this, but I think I'm the last person to join Koleda. I think I am.
And you were the end of it.
Well, when we were still performing. Anyway, but that being said, Koleda was something really unique. My parents had just gotten a divorce. I was raised Greek. I started dancing when I was probably 2 years old on my mother's hip. And strangely enough, I grew up in the Greek culture. I hadn't really had much American food until I grew up. But I was in search of a culture, strangely enough, because, the one you have isn't quite enough. Dennis showed up at the Greek church. I don't quite know how it all came about. My mother, who is sitting there, Dennis showed up, and he said, "Would you like us to train your children?" And we were the first group in the Greek community to have a name, which we were Levinya. And then I liked it so much that I wanted to dance more, and I wanted to find a real culture, not the one I had. So I started dancing with Koleda, and I met all of these people who I've now been friends with for over 45 years or something, and I found something. What I found really, if I really search it, is what I found the culture that I grew up with, because of the culture that you showed me was there. And when I went back in 1975, not speaking a word of Greek, I went back to Greece with my family, and I learned to speak Greek fluently. And I showed them dancing, that they were like, "Little American boy, whoa, you can dance." And I danced better than they did. But the thing is that I have one person to thank for two people to thank for two things. One, Mary Hoagland, because you were the one who taught me. Dennis showed us how to be flashy and how to, work a room on multiple levels. But you showed me how to be a great dancer. And all these people here we'll all attest to that. And I want to thank you. And I want to thank Mary Sure for introducing me to the beauty of music and singing and encouraging me and helping me do my own show. So thank you. So all of you, I love you all so much. No, you have to come over here. It doesn't go that far.
And we used to just we kind of invaded their family home from time to time. All of us Koleda kids would like show up at Zoe Fiddler's house and she would feed us. And I had no idea. I mean, she was a single mother and she would just roll out foods and hospitality and we want to thank you, Zoe. You were really a big part of our life. Scott, Chad Henry, everybody!
I'm like Rick, I don't know where to start or where to finish, but just an anecdote. I got into Koleda, and my mom had bought me this old busted up bouzouki at a place in Marysville. So I called Kafana, I thought about it, I go, is there someone there that can show me how to play this thing? And I guess it was Alex that I talked to, but he said, sure, come on down, I'll show you how to play the bouzouki. So I brought it down and I came down and Alex said, would you like to be in Koleda and come and play? He never did show me how to play the bouzouki. But I immediately got sucked in. I had a background with guitar and mandolin. I played Bratchen, Bistrenica, and Tambura, and eventually played upright bass with the Appalachian Suite for a while. And I think my starring moment was singing a Shape Note hymn solo at the World Without War concert at the Opera House.
That was so incredible, Chad. I remember it like it was yesterday. That was.
But I think that we had had a little bit of weed before the commercial. And I had a huge I know. And Hank Bradley walked up and reminded me that back then I sold him that bouzouki because I had no idea. And it turned out to be a really valuable antique. And we had it completely refurbished and apparently it plays beautifully now. And I'm so glad that he bought it and took care of it. But I have to say that the 2.5 or so years that I was with Koleda are some of the richest in my life.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Scott Nagel.
Yay, Scott Nagel!
In my case, being associated with Dennis and with Koleda actually changed my entire life and determined my future course, which I still do today, which is I became a producer because of Koleda. Tom and I were dancing up in Bellingham, and he was studying hard to be an architect, and I was pretty much dancing. Back then, it was a really good way to pick up girls because we were really strange, and people would just come down. I remember the elevator from films, and they'd come down, and there we would be dancing. And I'm sorry, Tom. Tom and I used to always do like Archon or a men's dance just when all the girls were on. In any case, we moved to Seattle to try to join Koleda, and Tom spent more time studying architecture. I gave up any pretense of school. I just wanted to be in the arts. And so first thing is Mary Hoagland was the teacher, and she was tough. And she taught us how to dance. So then I ended up having my first management job. I tried to run the Koleda Center and manage Dennis. That started my entire career of managing the arts. And of course it was the toughest, and I just remember one thing, I was in charge of, if you remember the Koleda Center, I was in charge of the Coke machine. Somebody remembers, and the key was to get the money out of the Coke machine to buy the Coke before Dennis. So also, the first concert I ever produced was actually up in Bellingham, and we brought Koleda to the high school, to the college auditorium. So that started my concert career. And then, so life went on, and I went to do festivals, and of course we danced, and eventually that led to Rodos and everything else. But I want to echo the base of the people who were there first, because we're like young. Well, we're all old now, but I guess we're so young. And meeting Dennis and the creativity and the joy and everything you brought, regardless of what his various issues were, which we all can laugh about now. There are plenty of funny stories. But his commitment, his vision, and drive to make us all do all this stuff for free was totally amazing. And the last thing I wanted to see is later on, because somebody mentioned Ruthanna, Boris, and Mark. At one point, we were in residence at the University of Washington with Ruthanna Boris, and Mark Morris' company came, and Mark wanted them to dance with us. I think this would be Rados then, right? And so we did master classes with Mark Morris Dance Group, and I know I went in going, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. These are professional ballet dancers. What are we even doing in the same room? Well, it turned out they couldn't do what we did. We couldn't do what they did. But what you saw was the origins of Mark Morris in terms of, and Ruthanna Boris, for those who remember at the UW, which is of character dancing, of Russian dancing, of dancing into the ground, right? And not above. And so that series we did, I don't remember what year it was just an amazing experience with Mark and his dancers and our dancers. So all these experiences we all have forever, and I'm happy that Dennis got me my start, and that's what I've done to this day, and I don't look back with regrets on anything that has happened over the years. So thank you.
Scott said was true. We both came from Bellingham after 2 years of college up there, and I was applying to the architecture school, and I could have gone anywhere, but there was only one choice, and that was to be in Seattle because of Koleda. So that's why I came to school here. But what I wanted to say was that Koleda, and I'm looking around at everybody here, was the foundation for something huge. 41 years ago, the Rados Folk Ensemble started, spring of '76. Scott and Glenn and a number of others of you, and it's still going. My wife Sydney is the artistic director. We rehearse every Sunday. I'm still there, dancing as much as I can. And what I wanted to tell you is that we have a half a dozen kids who are in their 20s, who are just so enthralled with this stuff they can hardly stand it. So your legacy continues on in a big way and will for a long time. The passion, the understanding of the dance, and being on stage. You know, all of you who've been on stage know what it's like to trust the people next to you. You cannot learn that any other way. And that's where the lifelong friendships come from. So I'm going to say thank you to all of you because of me and my experience. And I met my wife in Rados. Both of my daughters are dancing. My oldest daughter is a champion Irish dancer. My youngest daughter is down at Cal Arts getting a BFA in dance because they were crawling around on the floor when they were 2 at Rados. So Rados is as much a part of Koleda as anything else.
I'd like to say thank you to the two of you and Sydney as well, but especially you guys that worked with Rados. I guess I would say 3 of you that are here now, because you continued the legacy.
Yes.
Koleda was sort of like a mayfly, and you guys are like, you know, Galactus' turtles or something. Keep right on going.
Just in case you didn't hear that, Mary thanked those of us who started Rados and are in Rados for continuing this all along. Did I get that right?
It's like a mayfly.
Like a mayfly.
And you guys are like turtles, you just keep going.
Well, the slow
We are
part.
now,
Yeah, and the you all know that what the passion does for this dance in all of us. You know, as an architect, worked all my life doing that, but the passion is the dance, and it's not dancing by yourself. It's dancing with all of you, and that's what drives us all. And obviously, people like Dennis had huge passion and were willing to share it. But that's what we do. We share this passion, and that's it.
I'm Glenn Nielsen, for those of you that I don't know. First about Mary, it wasn't about learning to dance. She taught us how to walk on stage and do something else with our hands maybe at the same time. It was, I came to Koleda after 4 years at Reed College, which was one of the hotbeds of international folk dance on the West Coast. And I thought I was kind of a big deal. And I'd gone to a couple of classes with Dennis, and he talked to me afterwards and was impressed with what he saw, and he asked me to come up and join Koleda. And I decided between following my girlfriend to Stanford, which I wasn't in, and she was going to grad school there, or coming up to the UW and joining Koleda. And I made the latter choice. And right out of the gate, I got put in class with Mary, and I learned a great deal. The other thing that happened is somehow Dennis had managed to wangle a grant for a work-study job. And that was me. I was his work-study student, organizing his office, doing dance notes, printing music, transcribing and printing music. And I learned a ton from it. I learned a ton with the other dancers in Koleda about performing. It wasn't just the dance or the music for me. The performance was a critical element. It really got my blood flowing. And that turned into, well, 22 years of Radost after 2 years of Koleda, and I'm still performing as a singer these days. It fuels my life, the love of music and the love of dance. And that does, there would have been no Radost without Koleda and all of you. And I'm tremendously grateful. I cannot hardly express it. Yeah. Onward and upward.
I think that's as far as it goes.
So my name is Peter Lippman, and what I remember is in those days when there were hundreds of young people of our generation dancing at the Hub auditorium. I mean, massive crowds every week, like it used to be. And one day, Larry Ann comes up to me and says, as if she's from the Politburo, "We think that you're ready to come train with us." All that was lacking was the trench coat and fedora. But I was told when it came time to perform that I had to do something about my hair, which was down to here. It was frizzy and tight, so it could never get longer. But at some point, Jill Johnson said, "You know, all I ever saw of you was your nose and your dirty white T-shirt." Did I get that right? Sorry if I didn't. Something about like that. Anyway, and eventually the Minnesotans came, and Donnie gave me my first haircut. And I got to training in the Armory. Jill Cole was there, and I remember that. And starting to become a performer, Mary gets a lot of kudos. I actually remember something I learned from Dennis too, which was when he started talking about character, being in character on stage. That's when you change from being a folk dancer to a performer. Yes. And what I remember from Mary, among many other things, and Mary was the second woman in my life who taught me to dance, the first being my mother. She said, "You got to get some Christmas in your steps." And with my lousy hearing, I thought I kept thinking she was saying Christmas. It turned out she was saying crispness. And so we worked on that. Yes. And I became janitor. I remember sitting at some point for a while, there was a Koleda office at the Unitarian Church, yes. Right? And negotiating with Dennis that I was going to be janitor. It was my second honest job. I was working at PCC for a while too then, at the same time simultaneously. And so I was to mop up and sweep, and he offered me $2.50 an hour. Not bad in 1972. And I said, well, you know, $2 an hour is fine. Don't ask me why, but so he was okay with that. And you know, the smell of last night's wine in a plastic cup in a garbage can always brings me back to those days. And But so fitting into the scene, picture me at age 19. I didn't really know anything about social matters. I mean, interpersonal matters. I looked up to everybody. Maybe other people felt insecure, but I felt like everybody had been to Bulgaria. They knew so much more. They were just better in a lot of ways, and not to mention the women, which I probably shouldn't talk about too much, but just picture a line of young, dazzling womanhood, and I was, you know, definitely dazzled by that. I won't name any names. Though I didn't have much perspective about how life works at age 19. It just but it was, of course, the whole thing was attractive, and we kept going. It was very hopeful. There was Pullman, another thing I won't talk about.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, and